It's just something that you saw, whether it was an accident that was just so amazing. It could have been somebody getting out of the way of a car. It could have been a sunset. It could have been something that you just, words weren't enough. And I want you to figure out or think about how in the world would you tell somebody about that if it was the most important thing in your life? If you had seen like the sky open up and for that split second, the secrets of the universe made complete sense to you, but you had no words to be able to describe it, how would you tell someone? When we get into the realm of miracles, things change a little bit. We start getting outside of the borders of things that make sense for us. We get outside of these borders of words or science or understanding. And so I want to just look at some paintings tonight from some different artists about miracles and what does that mean when we look at them. I pulled this from Jeremiah 33, verse 6, mainly because I think on one level or another, the miracles that we see Jesus perform have one common thread. I should say two common threads. The first common thread about all the miracles is that Jesus is not just demonstrating some magical power. Okay, so Jesus is not just a magician. He isn't just somebody that came that had some miraculous ability over people's minds. He wasn't David Blaine. He wasn't some magician. He was the God of all of creation embodied in a human form. So all of his miracles are about telling people that. And then the second thing about miracles is that there's something involved in healing. Even if we look at the wedding in Cana, the idea of turning water into wine. Oh, thank you. That idea that there was something special going on that day that, and it was about to end, maybe prematurely. And his mom comes to him and says, "Son, I need your help. Please help me." And it's my mom's favorite verse in the book because that's what she says is the very first time that the look, you know, moms, that look you got, that when you look at your kid and they just know, oh crap, exactly, it's that look, the look. Because you hear Jesus, right? His response is, "Woman, what problem is this of mine?" And then the very next thing, there's no words in between, the very next thing that Jesus does is goes and does what Mary asked him to do. So what in between him saying, "Woman, this is none of my business," and him going and doing it happens? And I think this is kind of what it's about, is there's something about healing that's important, and there's something about healing that happens on a level that we don't quite get. I'm going to bring it recovery and healing. I will heal them and reveal them to them abundance of prosperity and security. The idea of prosperity and security. Let's look at that a little bit as we go through this. Kind of keep that in our minds as we go through some of these paintings. So this first one we have is called The Miracle of Loaves and Fish, and it's by Lambert Lombard from the early 16th century. So we're looking at 1500s, Middle Ages. Apparently this guy, this was a 104 centimeters by 111 centimeter painting. So 3 feet, roughly, a little bit over 3 feet on each side. Pretty large actual painting. And it's interesting on this because you kind of have you kind of have the vision down the middle. If you kind of almost see it, it goes from left to right. It almost looks like a cliff, and you have one side's green and one side's brown. If you notice, that is, it goes off into a river, it looks like, and that, who knows where that leads to. But then you have this kind of stream of people coming up and down the mountain here. If you were given the task of painting 5,000 people, how would you make it look like there were 5,000 people there without actually painting it? Painting 5,000 people would be ridiculous. So how in the world could you do any kind of detail and show this? It's interesting because this, to me, looks a lot like the Pilgrims. It looks a lot like the Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. Up on the left, if you can kind of see them, they're smaller. There's some people that are actually on the very, very way top. They're hidden in what looks like a cave, almost like a nativity scene, which is weird. And then at the very top, you have people that are almost hidden. And there's a theorist that says that this was a painting that was kind of describing the idea of bringing manifest destiny. The idea that everybody was to know about Jesus Christ, everybody, including the natives or anybody else that was there. But you have some amazing colors in this too, and I think that was another description of the life that comes in miracles is shown through color. How is it that color plays a part of our ideas of God, of our ideas of worship? We look at the colors of the year, and we have different colors for different seasons. We have different colors of flowers, Easter, smells. These are all things that artists are trying to kind of evoke in us to think about what it means that God is giving us life. You see Jesus in the middle, in the very classic pose. If you ever see a painting with somebody that looks important and he's holding two fingers up, that's always Jesus, because this is a holy sign. So anytime you see two fingers, could be the side up like this. That's why we do that in church. That's why the blessing is supposed to, it's just, I don't understand it, to be honest. I don't know where it comes from, other than the fact that Jesus is always portrayed with this two-finger blessing going on. This one's just from the 2000s. I'm trying to find some different kind of scope of people. I want to think about what it would be like if we were to tell people today what it meant that Jesus could feed people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish. On the level of hunger that we have comparatively, it's difficult. Food is something that's very powerful. It's used as a commodity. Anybody that knows the story of Black Hawk Down knows this, that the Somali rebels used Red Cross relief food that you and I maybe gave money for to be used for good. And they stole these shipments, and they basically used that as leverage against their own people. Food is not just a meal. It's not just something that we can eat and enjoy, and that we always know there's enough of it. Food is something that is very critical. So how in the world would we ever portray 5,000 people eating? This is probably the closest painting I've seen that actually portrays what looks like 5,000 people. You can kind of see as it goes into the wilderness, there's just people upon people. I think James Seward does a very good job of showing that this was a mass of people. This is a lot of times called the Feast of the Masses. This is 5,000 people eating together. This is 5,000 people that Jesus takes your lunch bag and makes a full meal out of it. I find it interesting that Jesus here is sitting with just a single child in the middle. You do have a separation of women and men, which is kind of weird, especially with this painter being in the 2000s. To me, if this was 1400s, 1300s, that might make a little more sense. There was that separation. But here you have the women and children are on the left, and you have all the men on the right. I don't quite understand the imagery of this. Jesus is in the middle eating lunch with the child, so that to me shows that there really is no distinction. That's, I guess, to me what the author or the artist might be saying, is that here you have basically the most authoritative being in the planet, which is Jesus, God in human form, and then you have probably the least authoritative person on the planet, which is a child. That's the unfortunate part. It also wasn't on coincidence that I picked Jeremiah to be our reader tonight, the child prophet. That from the idea that miracles kind of throw us off of our loop a little bit, they throw us out of our normal place when we think about them. This is a painting by El Greco, The Miracle of Christ Healing the Blind. You can kind of see just more of that illustrious color, more of that almost sky-like, like you're floating in the clouds. It's interesting on this one because you see the left corner of this painting has been left undone. And this was kind of a tactic by artists to kind of show obedience or show faithfulness, I guess, to God on some level. That some of these artists were seen as basically being life-giving people, that these creations they were making, the Sistine Chapel, these things were seen on a level of creation. And a lot of them left them undone because they basically said they didn't want to ever try to mimic God. So they would leave paintings undone. So this left corner is just kind of dark, and it just looks like the corner of a patio area, and that's it. And the rest of it is illustrious and detailed and oriented. In each little detail that it has a purpose. I find it interesting that it's like Jesus is healing these people in the midst of like the mall rush. Like people are shopping, and you have some people watching, and some people are doing other things, but what I see in this is I see a lot of contact. I see people touching people. I see a lot of people walking together. You have crowds being held back. You have some embrace going on here in the middle, and that's like the frame of the painting, but yeah, that's not Jesus. You have Jesus right here in the kind of pink and light blue, looking like he's poking the eyes out of a guy, but he's really healing him. To me, I look at that and I think, what is the artist trying to tell us? If the real center of the picture, these two guys in the middle, almost looking like they're doing the same thing Jesus is doing, could this be the disciples that are healing other people? Could it be the idea that somehow miracles happen in one another? They happen through us. They happen through people. Let's see if there's anything else I missed with that. This one, Jesus walking on water. Late 19th century, early 20th century, so we're looking at 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, turn of the century. One of the people that I read about William Brastley Hull was that he was so entrenched with the coal, the settling of coal in his city, because you're thinking about the Industrial Revolution, you're thinking about coal mines, coal factories, the coal soot that would come to rest in cities, that he went out and started using this soot to try to paint and make. So this is actually, I don't know if it's true or not, if he didn't go and use artist charcoal, but some people actually claim that he did this painting with the soot of the coal mines that would land around his town. To me, this is the realness of the water, and the idea that there's this kind of white ghostly figure in the background, but then you have these disciples that are literally climbing all over the boat. Climbing up the mast, climbing up, it seems just like overloaded with people. To me, there's this perfect idea of chaos and order happening right in front of this. That there's this idea that Christ comes walking in the midst of this light, almost as if the skies are opening up barely for him, like the moon is coming out to shine on everyone, and the chaos is ended. That this is the moment that everything is stopped for the disciples. That there is still a storm, but yet it is breaking up. This is the marriage at Cana, so this is the water to wine. And this, to me, I always laugh at some of the paintings because it's so obviously clear that this is not what the wedding looked like. And yet, this is what Gerard David draws for us. These kind of very, very Western European style people. You have Mary and Joseph, or Mary and Jesus, kind of denoted with the kind of that idea of the icon halo again. But this is the wedding meal, so this is kind of this very elaborate, very festive day, and Jesus is participating in it. And I like the idea of all these pots, right? All these containers being brought with water. Thinking about the idea that if you were running a party, so you imagine you invited everybody that you knew, and then had them invite everybody they knew, and everybody came to your house. And the one thing that you wanted for the party to get going, punch or wine or whatever you want to call it, beer, and you had somebody that came, you run out of it, and you had somebody that showed up and said, "Oh, I know how to do this. Just give me all the water you can, and I'll switch it." What would you do? I would go and run and grab every single thing that I could that could hold water, and I would start filling it up and bringing it to the guy. Hey, Jesus, this is awesome. So I just pictured these two workers that are running around this manor, grabbing all of these pots, and this is what these paintings are supposed to do. They're supposed to invoke in us something that's real. That this could be us. This could be us sitting at the meal. I find it interesting that you have a table that's predominantly dominated by women too, at the wedding, and this is 1500s. So interesting kind of equality there too. This one, the healing of the paralytic by Pellegrini. This is actually in a church in Vienna. This is above the altar. And it was built from 1716 and 1756, and this was put in 1732. So the altar took about 40 years to build. 40 years to build, and this is the centerpiece of it. Let's see, these are pretty much considered, this painting was considered one of the best of the Baroque period. So you're thinking of Beethoven, Mozart, kind of that area. Very, very elaborate. So you have this this painting that it's defined, but it's not. It's not as nice and clean as the last one that we saw. You have some more of it almost being like a wispiness to it. And you have these angels floating in the sky. You have this very whimsical kind of environment, but you have this, it's almost like one body, and they all kind of form together somehow. And then you have the paralytic in the middle, and Jesus obviously healing him. To me, I think the interesting part is it looks like the paralytic is being laid upon people. And the fact that's one of the things I never think of within the miracles, is that, yes, there are people that are healed, but if anybody's taking care of somebody that can't take care of themselves, like if they get hurt or they get sick, right, and you have to take care of them, what kind of load would be freed of you if now all of a sudden this person that you're taking care of, your whole life is around that on some level, are healed? Now they can walk. Now they don't have leprosy. They can see again. I mean, miracles were not just an individual relationship. They were not just a moment with one person. Miracles are meant for the entire people. They're not just meant for Lazarus or Jairus' daughter or any of those. They're meant for the people to believe. They're meant for people to be affected by. And I like this idea in the paralytic that he's literally being held up by people, and yet Christ is coming in the masses of people to heal him. I like this. This is, again, the disciples out on the water. It's just chaos. The painting is chaos. Everything except Jesus sleeping in the boat is chaotic. And then, if you can picture him, you can see him there right in the kind of top there in the white, and he's just sleeping. And you have all this other, just the swirling of colors, the swirlings of dark and with just the waves. If you've ever been out on a lake, a big lake with real waves, in the middle of a storm, it's sometimes not the best place to be in terms of, you already see kind of water coming over the bow a little bit. So there's chaos, and yet in the back of the boat you have Jesus just asleep. How much do we trust in God when hysteria becomes a part of our life? We're going to actually talk about that a little bit in my sermon tonight. But the idea is there is a chaos about life, and there is part of faith that I think we are constantly going back and forth on what it means to let go of that. I love the scene from Titanic as much as I don't enjoy that movie. I love some of the scenes, especially the scenes of the gentleman playing the quartet on top. And one of the gentlemen says, all right, I think it's time you guys get in the boat. And they say, okay, and they kind of go away. And then the violinist or the violist, I can never tell the difference, starts to play again, and the rest of the quartet comes back and joins him, even though the boat's about to go up topsy-daisy. There's something idea that when we finally let go, there's something beautiful in that. And I know it's kind of maybe morbid a little bit. You have the old couple down in the stateroom. They've accepted kind of their fate, but they're going to die together, and they're going to die together in each other's arms. There's something about that letting go that in this painting I feel it, that there are those moments where we are just barreling out the water in our boat. We're trying to just get it out. We're trying to say, hey, I'm in control. I can somehow overwhelm the overwhelming. I can somehow overcome that which is not overcomable. Those moments where we finally let go. And to me, I think this is a painting that very much plays with that emotion. This is probably the most beaten up painting. This is probably the most restored. And so we can't actually say what's completely original and what's not. But it's interesting in this painting. Two things. Caravaggio is the painter in 1608. Before he painted this, he just got out of jail. Accused for some crime. They didn't have any details really about the crime, but the one thing they did put in there was that he was falsely accused and imprisoned for this crime for like 18 years or something, 16 or 18 years. And he gets out, and within the first 2 years, he paints this painting. It's funny because I always think of Jesus, who's on the left here, in the healing of Lazarus, being very hands-on. I think of Jesus going into the tomb. I think of Jesus, and I don't know why. There's nothing in our Bible that tells us that he really goes in there and is hands-on. I just think of it. I think if you're going to raise somebody from the dead, you probably are going to have to touch them on some level. Maybe I'm just too defibrillized, the idea of defibbing somebody, pulling them back somehow. In this one, though, I feel like Jesus is accusing Lazarus. Like he's almost pointing to him like a judge, like this man. And then there's also this other kind of weirdness of like he's pulling him back to life. Like he's literally pulling him up from the standing point. But you can see Martha or Mary, one of the two sisters on the side here in the red cloak, that they're obviously grieving. They're holding him down. You have this kind of chaos of people in the back. I don't know if they're laying him down on a bench or if they're pulling him back up off the ground. You can't even tell if this is a tomb or not. You don't really even know where this is at. So there's some idea that Jesus is calling us, he's convicting us in these miracles, that there's some kind of conviction in this painting that goes beyond just him breaking into our life and touching us. Rembrandt, this is probably one of the more famous raising of Lazarus. And you have kind of darkness and light in this. You have the people living on the left who are in the light, and then you have Lazarus in the tomb who's coming back into the light, out of the darkness. But then you have, apparently you have somebody still back here in the darkness, and then apparently this is supposed to be some body up here on the right that I haven't been able to find that in my painting or lighten up my computer enough to find it. But I was wondering about Rembrandt kind of paints Jesus in this almost shocked look. If you look at him closely, he's kind of like, holy, well, look what I did, kind of this idea. Anybody that watched the Bible, the miniseries, on TV, I was struck by that kind of face of Jesus after he raises Lazarus. It's almost like this surprise, like, holy cow, look what, I really did this. Like, I really raised this person from the dead. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think Jesus really second-guessed his powers. I don't really read him ever doing that. But Rembrandt also had a lot to say about the French culture, about the French government, and there was a lot to be said about the idea that Christ was bringing the dead people back, because if you remember, French history is riddled with a lot of dead people, riddled with people that were killed for a lot of different reasons, false accusations, some real accusations. What's being said here when we have Jesus that's standing in the middle of light and darkness? There's a lot of evil and goodness going on in this painting. There's a lot of this idea that death is somehow bad and life is somehow good, which I think has been challenged in the past 300 years or so, trying to embrace death a little bit more. This is Jesus Maffa, African artist, description of Jairus' daughter. Challenging on some level because, obviously we know that Jesus wasn't from Africa either, but there's also that idea of understanding the fact that Jesus comes for all people. That idea that I think is broken up when we look at this, because we have to say to ourselves, yes, that even if the miracles didn't happen the way we thought they did, they happened, and they happened Jesus' way. The idea that the promise of Jesus is open for all people is another one of those abilities to sit and be humble to God and say, this is your will, not mine. And so that's what I appreciate about these paintings that throw us a little bit, that throw us off historically or accurately or whatever, or even just the colors of this raising of a daughter. This is a 1416 icon, biblical icon. You couldn't really find an authorship for this. But you'll see that there is a Holy Trinity depiction here. This is, again, the feeding of the multitudes, the feeding of the 5,000. So you have God up here in this cloud, the old white beard guy in the cloud, like the stereotypical picture of God. And he's holding, he's supposed to be holding like the world in his hand, but to me it looks like he's holding a crystal ball and kind of like a seance. It really doesn't, it kind of throws us up against a lot of the stereotypes and things that we fought against probably really hardly in the last 700 years. People that burn for these kind of heresies. But so then you have that, and then you have the Holy Spirit depicted in the dove, and then you have Jesus again with the icon halo in the middle in the two-fingered blessing pose. But I just thought this was interesting. This would be something that you'd find in a Bible, in Scripture, or somewhere up on the wall of a church. And it was interesting because that's also partially what we have to remember is art was used to teach for so long. Art and pictures because people didn't know how to read. So you'd show this and people would get some of the ideas that what you would tell them in church because they could kind of picture it. This was our idea of a, what's the word I'm looking for here? A multi-level presentation or an interactive presentation. You'd have people looking at these pictures on the walls of your church while you talked about it in your sermon. This is another one of Jesus walking on the water. This is from 1300s. This is a Byzantine icon, or this would have been put up in a church as well, Venisanio. And again, it's interesting, you have this holiness amongst all the disciples now. All of them have this holy halo, and yet Peter and Jesus are still in the same sense, but I wonder, what's this guy in the mountain? Why does he not have a halo? Why isn't he special? And that, this is how the artists would depict it. There were chosen people. For a long, long time, up till about mid-1900s, that was a very, very common idea. It was either you were chosen by God or you weren't. And if you weren't, the idea of being cursed by God was an actual understanding for a long time. People really felt that somehow they had done something, their family had done something, their great-grandparents had done something that somehow God was still looking down upon them about. And so you see this in the art, that there are some people who are chosen and there are some people who are not. It's a very interesting way of looking at Christ, that, he's pulling Peter, who we all know is kind of a big brute kind of man, and he's pulling him out of the water. He's pulling him what looks like out from under the boat. And then you have this guy over here that seems to be somehow connected to the boat. It's like he's tying it on or something. I don't know, very interesting depictions, and a lot of this was church denoted. This is probably my favorite painting, maybe ever. This is by Gabriel Max, 1878, and it's the raising of Jairus' daughter. And to me, it's just so real and so beautiful on some level. There's an intimacy in this painting that, I don't know, it wasn't captured in a lot of the other ones to me. This to me feels like Jesus is raising this girl because he really does love her. The kind of love that he has for each one of us. It's almost tangible in this painting. It's almost as if this little girl is going to get up right out of it and walk out. I find it interesting, too, because this was a good depiction that I saw of showing Jesus not in, like, the luminous light, like the radiant, like the angel and the brightness and the shining and all that over him, and that you have the person who's injured or who's sick in the light. The person that's close to death is being illuminated. You see that, this is the change of 1300s to 1800s, late 1800s. You have this switching of somehow being labeled in a class of saved or not, of being able to say the words of faith for yourself now, of being able to read the Bible for yourself, being able to make your decisions about going to church safely or not. And yet, the luminous, life-giving light is on the sick. And Jesus is wrapped in the dark shroud. I have a friend of mine who's a pastor in California, and he loves to write every single tweet and Facebook message I hear from the guy is, everything about the Bible is about Jesus. The Old Testament is about Jesus. The Psalms are about Jesus. And I love Jesus, and I agree that on some level you can find ways to connect every prophecy and Old Testament story to him. But there are some things that we need to learn in the context of which when they happened. One of the things that I think is learned in this painting is the idea that Jesus didn't come just to be celebrated, that Jesus didn't come just to be put up on a pedestal or to be allotted into this like heavenly hall of fame. This wasn't like the Ring of Honor that they're going to put up around Minnesota Stadium and Jesus just wanted to get up on the side. Jesus came for each of us so that our lives would be different, so that we would be changed, literally, physically, and everything about us would change. That this was an enacting, an engagement, an illuminating of life on a level that we have yet to see ever and won't ever see again. That the onus of life has been switched. That we are now no longer living just chasing away death and trying to chase away the inevitable death of hell, but we are living in light and we are living with life. So this is what switches, and I love that Gabriel does this because this is something that took a very long time, almost 2,000 years after Jesus, for us to get. That Jesus didn't come so we would have weapons to shut people out of faith. We wouldn't say, oh, you didn't do this right. Oh, you're not the right gender. Oh, you're not the right race. Oh, you weren't raised right. Oh, you've made too many mistakes before. Oh, you have an addiction. Jesus is not for you. That's not what Jesus was about. And it took us about 2,000 years to get that Jesus came for sinners. Jesus came for the broken. Jesus came for the dying. Jesus came for the suffering. Jesus didn't come to go up on the pedestal. And this painting switches it. And I love it. I love it because there's a part that you look at this and you say, what do we do with the things we don't understand? Why is it important for faith to connect with what we know and understand? These are the two questions that I ask myself constantly. Because when I sit there and I write a sermon or I do this and I go, well, that's not going to make any sense. It just drives me nuts because there's nothing worse in my mind than getting up on Sunday and wasting your time. Or getting up here and wasting your time. Getting up here and not doing something where I got to say, oh, I better draw all the lines, make all the connections, make all the conclusions. I better wrap it up in a bow. And then Brian tells me, rightly, and puts me back in my place and says, trust your audience. They'll put it together. You don't have to tie everything in a bow. You don't have to put everything nicely together. You don't have to cover all the spots. I want to flip that back for this tonight and say, what is it about life that we don't understand and we're willing to let it go? Because I look at the miracles and my pre-med brain, my whatever rational enlightenment brain you want to talk about says, that's not possible. There's just no possible way. Chemically, water does not have the components needed for wine. Life does not just come back, especially without help of some electronic stimuli and medicine and accelerating medicine like adrenaline and those things that go into your body. That just doesn't happen. So how do you raise some? And there's these things that we just say, this doesn't make sense. And that's why I wanted you to start with that. With the idea of how in the world would you tell somebody something that you couldn't explain? Why is it important that we understand? Why is it important for you that Jesus or God makes sense? There's some things that I envy about pre-enlightenment people, and that was their ability to trust and have faith in God beyond understanding. They looked at lightning and they didn't try to figure it out. They just figured it's something about God, and I should stay away from it. It looks pretty powerful. It looks like it could kill me. And granted, we would call this naivety. We would call this ignorance. We would call this lack of intelligence. But everybody that I've talked to, either a world-known chemist that I did my CPE excursion with this summer, or the Buddhist monk that came and visited us talking about how do you do pastoral care to Buddhist patients, which was very interesting. You have to wash your feet in the sink and all this weird stuff. But there was, in both of them, there was a seeking of understanding, and every single time they got to the edges of their thinking, they had to come to a point where they either went into insanity or trust in God. And the Buddhist said God. He said trust in God. But there comes a point you have to let go. So I think part of what being an adult means in faith is that we can say with confidence, I don't know. And be okay with that. You see, I think that there's a myth about growing older, and I'm figuring this out as I go, is that somehow because you are more wise, it means that there are less questions. That you have somehow figured out answers so you can just knock them off the list, and somehow as you get more wise and you get older and you get more information and things make more sense and you can study them, that list gets smaller. And the truth of the matter is, what Socrates said, what I know is that I know what I don't know. Basically, that's a real awful alliteration of it. But what I know, the more I know, is that I know I don't know. So the more I know what I don't know. The idea is that this thing is infinite. You can get to the furthest reaches of space, and there's space being made exponentially. So there has to be a point where we let go. As adults in faith, we have to be able to look at one another and say, I don't know, I trust God. I trust God. One of the most beautiful examples I had of this, I told you this story last session about the mom whose son committed suicide after shooting another person, and she looked at me and said, will my son go to hell because he committed suicide? And you could see her struggling with these things of faith that people had told her about, that somehow salvation wouldn't come in this box. And she looked at me and said, I want you to tell me an answer. I want you to give me an answer. And I couldn't. I gave her my answer. But what I saw 8 hours later in that mom was the ability to let go of her son. Her ability to say, I don't know. Even the quote-unquote holy men or priests can't tell me. And I'm going to need to let him go because he's dying. And he did die about 18 hours later. But when I came back to see them again, and you could see the father was just trying to figure out a way to save his kid. He just tried to figure out how life was going to continue forward. And the mom finally says in this group, we have to let him go. He wasn't ours to begin with. We have to let him go. That's a big deal for a mom to be able to say that. I mean, this is mom. This is Mama Bear. This is her child. This is her baby. And she could say, he wasn't even ours to begin with. We have to let him go. There has to come that point for us in faith where we're comfortable with it. And if we're not comfortable with it, then to me, those are the edges of life that I think take the most courage. Because I think it's really easy to sit in those areas that are comfortable, that make a lot of sense. Jesus loves me, this I know, that God accepts me for who I am, that grace is abounding, so I really don't need to change my ways. But those moments where we're pushed outside of the lines, when we're pushed to believe that God's love is for people that we don't think has any business being a part of, or that God's calling us to change in some way that we may not be willing to, but there has to be a point where we let go and have to give it up to God. Sometimes our lives speak for us. I think Lutherans are really good at this. At least we claim to be. And I think it's true. I don't think it's if you look at our record, Lutheran World Relief, always one of the first relief organizations to be on the scene of a catastrophe, always one of the last ones to leave. Lutheran World Relief is also the same organization that gives the highest amount of percentage per dollar of your giving to people that need it. So if you give to Haiti, or you give to Indonesia, or you give to the Philippines, or you give whatever it is, you give $1 of it, right? You give $1 of it to the Red Cross, 13 cents of it gets to the people. You give $1 of it to Lutheran World Relief, close to 97 cents of it goes to the people. I mean, there's some things that Lutherans do really well. We live this faith on some level. We may not be good at talking about it sometimes, but we live it dang well. Live it out. And we're willing to go to a lot of places to do that. But I also want us to wonder about what it means to not be in our head all the time. This is probably the most difficult thing for me to do, just to be completely transparent with you. And I'm pretty much writing this to myself, is how do you get out of your head? How do you stop trying to figure it out? How do you stop trying to figure out how to lock out the busyness and let God in? One of the things that I want to challenge you guys to do, and I've been trying to do it this past week and getting a little bit better at it, is to take some time and try to just, for 5 seconds, do nothing but focus on your breathing. Close your mouth, breathe in and out of your nose, and for 5 seconds, just focus on your breathing. Nothing else, no noise, nothing, no music, nothing. So, I mean, that's probably first part of the challenge, is actually to find a space where you can have nothing. No sound, no bothering. But in that 5 seconds, and every day, or if you want to try it then, try to let that time get a little bit longer. What I want to remember in this idea of miracles is that Jesus and God, I should say God, through Jesus and what he did by living on this planet, is able to break in a physical way in our life. He's able to touch our lives, to be a part of our lives, to walk with us, And if we can just shut off that mind every now and again and reconnect with that very life-giving rhythm of ourselves, there's something about that we're reconnecting into God. Sometimes I think being an adult in faith is being able to go beyond the body. It's like going back into the childlike mind and realizing that God does some really superhuman things, does some really outstanding, amazing, unbelievable things. And my last conclusion tonight was that God is continually reaching out into the world for you and me. And sometimes you may be the one who names that for others. I talked about it a little bit last week, that God's not waiting for your acceptance to be a part of your life. God's not waiting for your membership card to come in. God's not waiting for your approval, your stamp on the bottom of the application. He is a part of your life, whether you like it or not. That's the promise. And I don't mean that to be abrasive. I just mean that to say that on some level, people look at the world and they see these things that are happening in their life and they don't quite get it. It's not clicking for them. Miracles happen, in my opinion, to make it click for people. People saw this and saw Jesus touching and healing people in a very real way that they felt compelled. They couldn't stop but go and tell other people about this guy, this person that had just healed the leper, that the person who couldn't walk can now walk. Things started to click. There was a name in the universe that hadn't been there before, and it was Messiah. Messiah meant something. It still means something. It changed the absolute world. And so sometimes when we look at miracles, it's that idea that the world is not anymore playing by the logic that we've put upon it, by the law, by the idea that somehow this all has to add up and it all has to make sense. Miracles push us out of there. And what's neat about that is that means that God, who is outside of the boundaries too, can reach us even when we're out there. Can reach us when we're out in the deepest, darkest brokenness that we've ever experienced in our life. Deep up in the best, joyful, most wonderful day of our life. God gets to journey with us through that whole spectrum. Being able to speak our faith for people is sometimes the only name of God that comes into their world. If you can name God in the world, if you can say things and say that's a blessing, that is God working in the world, that is something that, I don't understand it, but I believe that God's there. I believe God's present and working in this. That may be the only time people actually get the naming of it. It may be the only time that they may get that chance to have that light come on and go, holy cow. This wasn't just something that happened by coincidence. This wasn't just something that just happened now. This is something that's been building. Something that's been calling me. That's the beauty of being able to become a pastor, is that this is the absolute last job I ever wanted. I completely can say that with 100% certainty. I would rather be anything else in the world, to be honest. Nobody judges you in the grocery store when you get something if you're a cop. They're not like, well, he's getting some beer today. Man, he's a police officer. You're allowed to do that. I run into some people, well, what are you getting? And I just always in the back of my head, what are they thinking? I lived with this my whole life. It was like, you got to be good. You got to be good. You got to be a good kid. Like we just saw you at the movies, right? Like, what if I was going to see some awful, horrible, like Saw 12? Even like, this guy is my pastor. He's going to see the worst movie I've ever seen. I mean, so there's a lot. But what I love about this, to be honest, is that I can look back at my life and honestly tell you that God has been grooming me for this. That every single thing, whether it was my wonderful childhood with my mom and dad, whether it was my awful decisions in high school that almost got me killed, whether it was the falling apart of relationships in my early adulthood, or going back to school as a 30-year-old. All of these little things that I thought were screw-ups and mess-ups and bumps and really big, gross cracks in my painting that needed to be covered up are really, every single one of those things is God grooming me to be able to sit up here and preach a gospel that is truly living in the life of people. And I will do that until the day I die, probably, because I won't be able to retire. But but there is something about this, that this is a lifelong journey with the impossibly known God. There is a level of that I want to bring back with miracles, that yes, there is a part of God that we do not know. We just have to be okay with that. There's a part of God that we can't research or detail on our cell phone, our smartphone. There's a part of God that we can't figure out in science. That's the miracle part of God. Part of having an adult witness, I think, is being able to witness to that and say, it's in his hands, and I'm okay with it. Let's pray real quick before we go. Gracious God, I give you thanks for this evening and for this opportunity to come and talk about what it means that you reach into our lives and sometimes beyond us, that we can't fully grasp what you are, who you are, and what you do. Help us to be okay with that. Help us to know that even though we don't know, that we are living confidently in your hands, that no matter what comes our way, you are walking with us, that you have called us from the beginning, and that you are molding us into what we need to be. And give you thanks that this is the way you work in the world. Give us courage that we may name you in the world, that we may tell others about you and show them in the very realness of our life, being genuine and honest with them, who we are, sharing that with them, sharing our faith. We give you thanks for all these things. Amen.